Kamakani a papa.
Mele no na vaqueros na pua sevania ka aina aloha. Ua lave ia mai na kika ka aina o Espanya no ka lehu. O ka wahine ui e hula na mai en un bonito traje de luna. Nani ono o na peiga poli ho pili corazón kawahine aloha ua hao hoa aku ina lio kauika pololena ka moku kia kolu ua tomi sina ia e kalani Kamehameha O ka wahine ui e hula na mai En un bonito traje de luna E nani ono O na peiga poli Ho pili corazón Ka wahine aloha
Good afternoon. I'm Don Guzman, Chair of the Parks, Recreation, Energy, and Legal Affairs Committee. Shall now come to order. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our members that we have today in the chambers. We have Alika Tai. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yukile Sugimura.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Robert Carroll. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And Stacy Crivello. Good afternoon. Excused is Ricky Hokama, as well as Vice Chair of the committee, Kelly King. Joining us later will be Chair of the Council, Mike White. Why don't we go ahead and check in with our district offices before we begin. In Hana office. Hana office, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon. This is Dawn Lono at the Hana office.
There's
no one waiting to testify.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lono. In Lanai District Office, is anyone wishing to testify?
Good afternoon, Chair. This is Denise Fernandez on Lanai, and there is no one waiting to testify.
Thank you. On Molokai District Office, Ms. Alkan, is there anyone wishing to testify?
Good afternoon,
Chair. This is Ella Alcon of Molokai, and there is no one here waiting to testify.
Okay, thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our members of our staff. We have Pauline Martins, Committee Secretary, as well as Maggie Clark, our Legislative Analyst, and Carla Nakata, our Legislative Attorney. For our administrative side, we have Jerry Shepard, our Deputy Corporation Counsel, Wendy Taamoto on behalf of the Department of Management, as well as Tanya Lee Gregg, Maui County Director and Principal Investigator of the Cultural Surveys Hawaii Incorporated, and Halit Hammett, which is also the President, Principal of the firm Cultural Surveys Hawaii Incorporated, as resource individuals. Turning our attention back to the chambers, is there anyone wishing to testify?
Mr. Chair, there's no one signed up in the chambers to testify.
Okay, thank you. Members, at this time, without objections, I'd like to close public testimony. Thank you. Public testimony is now closed. Moving on to our first item on today's agenda, we have PRL 26, the Hawaiian Cultural Restoration. Members, the purpose of this presentation today, and I'm going to go ahead and state this on the record so that our new members have an opportunity to get up to speed. This has been an ongoing item in our committee for the last 5 years, and we've worked on it. I believe we've had 10 meetings on it as well. This has been ongoing for the last 20 years, and I just wanted to be able to place this on the record, on the background of it, so the new members have an opportunity to get up to speed. So accordingly, the presentation for today is going to be an update from the Cultural Surveys Hawaii Incorporated relating to the archaeological inventory survey for the Mokuhinia ecosystem restoration for the Department of Management. Members, the history of this item in committee goes way back, like I said, to 2011 within this committee. To provide context, according to Committee Report 16-201, in 2000, the Council approved the grants of a lease and a license, which allowed Friends of Moku'ula to occupy properties at the corner of Front and Shaw Street in Lahaina. The site is historically significant as the home of the Chief Piilani since the 1500s. The site had freshwater, spring-fed ponds that surrounded a 1-acre sandbar island, Moku'ula, which was the residence for the Kamehameha line in the 1800s and was a political center when Lahaina was capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii. The properties were abandoned in the early 1900s. In January of 2002, the county entered into two agreements with the Friends of Moku'ula. The first was a 35-year lease of approximately 2 acres for $1 per year, and the second was a 20-year lease for a parcel approximately 2.7 acres, also for $1 per year. The lease and license required the property to be used solely to restore and preserve Moku'ula and the ponds of Mokuhinia. In 2011, the Economic Development, Agriculture and Recreation Committee, this committee, began reviewing a concession agreement with the Friends of Moku'ula and topics relating to the restoration, preservation of Moku'ula and the ponds of Mokuhinia. 2 committee meetings on the related matters followed in 2012. The Council's Economic Development, Energy, Agriculture, and Recreation Committee during the period of 2013 and 2015 met again on the matter in 2014. Then last term, the Economic Development, Energy, Agriculture, Recreation Committee met 3 times in 2015 and 3 more times in 2016 on related topics. A total of 10 committee meetings over 5 years resulted in a number of findings, including the including the creation of the Hawaiian Cultural Restoration Fund in 2016, which the incumbents on the council allowed the budget amendment to go through, and the creation of the revolving fund was placed and recommended in the FY 2018 budget to ensure fiscal responsibility for the property restoration. Before restoration could begin, an archaeological inventory survey was required. In FY 2014, we appropriated $200,000 for the survey, and another $50,000 was appropriated in FY 2015 to install fencing along the perimeters of the project site to prevent trespassing and vandalism during the archaeological inventory survey. In anticipation of the completion of the survey in 2017, I proposed to the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee approved $400,000, also with the help of Ms. Cochran, which was appropriated from the Park Assessment Fund in West Maui for the restoration project for Moku'ula and Mokuhinia, which would be awarded through an RFP process. The RFP for the restoration of the site is on hold pending completion of this survey. Last term, on November 29, 2016, the Economic Development, Energy, Agriculture, and Recreation Committee, EAR as it once was, received an update on the archaeological inventory survey. At that time, it was anticipated that the survey would be finished by last February. So as you can see, this survey has been ongoing and a long time coming, and the presentation is, at present, it will be a huge step forward in terms of the restoration project. The survey will positively identify the on-the-ground perimeters of the Moku'ula Island and the associated holding pond adjacent. The scope also includes additional exploratory trenching within further extent of the pond itself on the east side or the Mauka side. Once completed, this survey will be sent to the State Historic Preservation Division. Concurrently, community input would be sought and restoration plans will continue to move forward. We have here today, we have Ms. Ta'amoto, who is here to represent the Department of Management. And before we begin, I'd like to ask her if she has any comments before we have Ms. Lee Gregg do her presentation on the survey.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Wendy Ta'amoto. I just wanted to add to Chair Guzman's comments that the project is, to clarify for the new members specifically, that the project is the Mokuhinia restoration project that we're specifically talking about today, not the Moku'ula Island, and that the Mokuhinia restoration project is a project that is co-sponsored by the County of Maui and the United States Army Corps. And as a co-sponsor, through discussions with the Army Corps, we were responsible for the completion of this AIS in order for us to move forward with the final EA. So we published, the Army Corps published as a co-sponsor with us the draft Integrated Feasibility Report and Environmental Assessment in August of 2013, and that is on hold until we complete this AIS work and other less significant items to proceed with a, if applicable, a FONSI and the final EA publication. So that's what, where we are with the project. Did you need me to go into the Not really.
I think we'll probably have more questions after the presentation.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Thank you. So why don't we go ahead and Ms. Lee Gregg, if you can say a few words on your opening before you begin your archaeological inventory survey presentation.
Aloha, my name is Tanya Lee Gregg. And just a correction, I'm the former Maui Director for Cultural Surveys, Hawaii. Dr. Hammett, the principal, has been kind enough to let me complete this kuleana as a part of that project. So we actually have the current Maui Office Director, Trevor Yuha, in the audience here today as well.
Okay. Does Mr. Hammett want to address the committee before you begin, Ms. Lee Gregg?
Well, just very briefly as an introduction, I'm peripherally involved in this project and we've been doing on and off for 8 years. And I just want to compliment Tanya on the thoroughness and the professional nature of the work, as you will see in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Lee Gregg, you may present.
Okay. Okay, so as previously noted, the inventory survey was for the purpose of the Mokuhinia wetland restoration project. Oh, hello. Sorry. At the end of the draft feasibility document, the proposed this proposed conceptual restoration site plan, and the premise for this is one part to restore the wetlands of Mokuhinia, the other part to protect what was believed to be the boundary of Moku'ula Island at that time, as well as reserving a portion of what is parcel 2 or parcel 1 for future cultural activities for Friends of Moku'ula. So this is the proposed conceptual plan for the overall project for the Mokuhinia Wetland Restoration Project. I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about how the boundary of Moku'ula Island, as depicted on the conceptual plan, came to be for this conceptual plan. We have 3 early maps that depict the boundaries of the island within the larger lot lines. So looking at these 3 maps, the most generous rendition of the boundary was used to develop the initial site boundary for Moku'ula Island. The other thing, I'm sorry, how does this work? Hello? The other thing that I wanted to point out is the earliest map for Moku'ula Island shows what is believed to be a northern holding pond here. And this is the only map in which this particular feature pops up for the island. As we move forward in time, these maps lose this upper northern island, or northern holding pond. What the Army Corps did in this rendition is to account for the possible presence of this northern holding pond when they developed their overall boundary for Moku'ula. On top of this approximate outline of the island, they proposed a 10-meter or approximate 30-foot buffer between the island perimeter and construction for the Mokuhinia restoration project. Additional information that was gathered from previous archaeological studies in the area was also utilized to help with approximating the boundary of the island. The first being this early shamanic study of parcel 1. If you remember back sometime, this parcel just west of Waianae Church was once a dump. Yeah, so their study identified local Mokuhinia pond sediments in this section of the parcel and potential intact land sediments in this section of the parcel. The actual boundary of that was still a little bit needed to be determined to place that absolutely. The landmark study for Moku'ula Island was conducted by the Bishop Museum in the 1990s. And this is their field map. And the purpose of their study was to see if there were intact deposits or sediments from Moku'ula Island still present below Malu'uluolele Park. And they did achieve that. They identified in these sections cultural material and deposits that are consistent with what is believed to be Moku'ula. What needed a little bit more work and what they weren't exactly clear on, again, was the absolute delineation of this boundary, right? So they believed that they found the edge, but they still said, hey, maybe more work needed to get done. And then in 2012, University of Hawaii Maui College went back out to the area, and they focused on a smaller region in this area here, near what was believed to be a wooden pier at one point in time. And their study as well found the sloping portion of the island, or what they believe to be the sloping bank of the island, but not really the foot of the island. So that was still needed to be determined. So when SHPD went ahead and reviewed the draft feasibility study, they weren't entirely comfortable with the boundary of the island as depicted in the draft feasibility study and wanted a little bit more information. They had concerns regarding the accuracy of the placement of the 10-meter protective buffer and whether or not it was in the right place and whether or not it was adequate. They had concerns regarding the lack of additional survey work beyond the studies conducted previously, so just the 2 studies in the park as well as the 1 study in Parcel 1 next to Waine'e Church. And this all resulted in a request for additional information via archaeological inventory survey, the goals for which were the location of the edge of the Moku'ula Island and identification of potentially significant historic properties elsewhere in the island, elsewhere in the parcel. So for the TMK, and I keep referring to these parcels, this is the overall final or collective restoration area. The blue being the Mokuhinia wetland restoration area of potential effect. That crosses between Parcel 2 and Parcel 36, as well as the Army Corps or Salvation Army parcels here in these lines. Moku'ula Island, as depicted here, crosses over Parcel 2, Parcel 36, and a portion of this Salvation Army parcel here. And the side reserved for Friends of Moku'ula is in this Parcel 1 here, a portion of this Parcel 1, with this limited area being designated for wetland restoration. Okay, so that's the overall TMK. So again, the goals of the AIS and scope of work were to identify the edge of Moku'ula Island and the associated holding ponds and conduct additional archaeological inventory survey. This map we bring up because prior to the discovery of this map fairly recently, what we had to go on were those really early maps. And those were the best representations for what we knew the island boundary to be. This particular map was found at Halepa'i more recently. And it's important because it was developed for the government swamplands. And it was developed in anticipation of filling in of local Mokuhinia. Yeah. So what this does is it provides us a more recent survey of the island perimeter based on survey reference points that can be still found today. And it also, because of the purpose of this plan set to determine the volume of fill needed to accomplish the land reclamation at local Mokuhinia, it gave us soil profiles to be able to see, or pond profiles to be able to see in cross-section where the island may be located, where an additional north causeway may be located, as well as the potential depths of the pond on the Waine'e side of the island, as well as the Front Street side of the island. So this was really a very important piece of information that was not available prior to finding this. So again, the purpose of this plan set is to determine the volume of fill needed to accomplish the land reclamation for Mokuhinia and Malu'ulu'olele Park. So at that time, they were estimating 50,598 cubic yards of fill. The idea behind our inventory survey plan and our research design was to take a look at the public works plan set and maybe try to reverse engineer kind of what was happening. Also taking into consideration the underlying Bishop Museum excavation results, right? So the one thing that we did is we had land surveyors come in and stake out the red outline, which is the 1916 boundary of the island as surveyed, as well as giving us a bit of a 2-meter survey buffer for stakeout. Just in case the boundaries were kind of a little off, we didn't want survey stakes going into the island sediments themselves. So our two pieces of information, our two main pieces of information were this 1916 survey plan and the Bishop Museum AIS excavation layout. So at the end of our fieldwork effort, our summary of AIS, we excavated a total of 135 50 by 50 centimeter test units, square, by hand. And an additional 10 mechanically assisted trenches completed on the eastern section of the parcel. Okay. Overall cultural material recovered from the excavations, 56 traditional Hawaiian artifacts or indigenous artifacts, 998 artifacts of post-contact Western origin, 1,210 grams of dietary remains, or we call it midden, and 236 grams of botanical remains or kukui shell, which could either be food refuse or used for other medicinal purposes and things like that. So the question then is, were we able to identify the Moku'ula Island perimeter, yeah? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of go on a little bit of a tour around the island here, starting with the west perimeter. We identified what we believe to be base stones or remnant base stones of the former perimeter wall that once surrounded Moku'ula Island. Either that or the foot of the island banks as it enters into the pond sediment. So parcel 2, western section, parcel 36 in the parking lot, western section. Okay. So beginning here, we started on the Front Street side of the 2-meter buffer or 2-meter survey stake. And what we saw in the stratigraphy, that was pretty straight all the way across, okay? We had the current ballpark fill, an earlier park fill, the Mokuhinia fill, and the sensitive pond sediments, pretty straight across. When we moved to the east of that buffer, and then we begin to see a change in the sediment, right? So now we're seeing this even topography, pond topography, and now we're starting to encounter stones, base stones, remnant stones, and the like, as well as we see a change in the topography of the soil layers here, right? So what this is doing is that this is sloping toward Front Street. One indication that we may be looking at the bank or the foot of the bank of Moku'ula Island, right? We get the same similar results here. Very little cultural material in this fill sediment. Pretty even topography. As we move to the east of that survey line, we see again this sloping topography moving toward the east, yeah? So it's sloping toward Front Street. And similar here. If we look in the parking lot, these are photographs of the respective units. The depths of these stones are consistent with the exception of this one. This one we believe to be near the top of the island. But these are all at depths that may be consistent with a footing or remnant footing of the perimeter wall. In parcel 36, we come across a fairly intact portion of what we believe to be the western perimeter wall. Parcel 36 is the parking lot, and it is one of the only units where we encounter construction outside of the 2-meter survey buffer. Okay. So again, we came down in this unit here and followed the stones until they sloped down toward Front Street. Okay. So this being one of the more intact portions that we believe to be a part of the perimeter wall. On the north causeway, again, we're looking at identifying construction within that 2-meter survey buffer from the red line as illustrated on the 1916 survey map. These are coral boulders that we believe may be associated with the perimeter wall toward the top of the island. And this feature here, we're looking at potentially being associated with this northern causeway feature. These are photographs showing that boundary. These are the coral boulders that are near the top. And you can see the top of these island sediments sloping into the pond sediment toward the north. Yeah. As well as we're coming up on the northern causeway here. This northern causeway, or this sort of length of apparent land in this area, this only shows up on the 1916 map. It doesn't show up on any of the earlier maps. So previously, prior to finding this map, we didn't really know about this. So one of our tasks were to identify whether or not this was actually still intact and maybe what the nature of this causeway or this berm might be. What we did identify is that for the most part, this new feature is earthen, more earthen than stone construction. So that's another thing that we were wondering, was it stone wall or was it an earthen berm? And our excavations confirmed that it's likely an earthen structure. Okay. So this is the south wall, and this is the east wall. So here. And what you can see here, again, as similarly to the western perimeter, you have a sloping of what we believe to be the earthen berm sediments into the pond, right? So we have nice even topography, and then we have this sloping topography overlying the causeway sediment. Similarly there on the other side of the berm, sloping in the opposite direction toward Waine'e. Right? Here we encountered a bit of a difference here, is that this edge right here is actually located right here. So here we experience some error with the 1916 map, as it does not curve this way, but generally trends in this direction. Okay? We know that because when we were looking for it this way, and we kept going this way and we weren't finding anything, we thought, well, maybe it's not there. It dried out a little, and the grass kind of showed us a different story, so we said, let's try the opposite direction. So we went in this way, and then we found the sloping sediment here. So it's actually on this side, and it slopes this way. So this goes like this. Okay. These are photographs showing the sloping sediments, or illustrating that. This is the sediment of the causeway. This is the Mokuhinia fill for land reclamation. And this really dark stuff down here, that's the natural pond sediment. and just similar photographs illustrating the same thing. This is the profile for this unit illustrating the sloping sediments associated with this causeway fill right here. Causeway here. Mokuhinia fill overlying this sloping layer. So confirming the presence of this northern causeway, moving on to the eastern perimeter. One of the things that was a concern for us with the eastern perimeter was the discrepancy or the differences between the 1916 boundary line and the 1884 boundary line that the Bishop Museum used. The difference here is about a good 10 meters, so 30-foot difference between the two boundaries. So it was really important for us to kind of take a really close look at this area. So what we did is we started kind of in the middle here, really, really carefully, to see whether or not we were going to encounter any moku'ula sediments in between this 10-meter difference. What we did find was similar to the western perimeter, where we were outside of the island or well into the pond, just kind of this straight stratigraphy going all the way down. When we moved back toward the 2-meter survey stakeout line, we see the sloping sediments of the island bank again. So this kind of, what this does for us is it heightens our confidence in the 1916 map perimeter. Similar here, and just more of that same thing. Layers of ballpark maintenance fill. This is the land reclamation fill, and this is the island slope here. And again, the same, generally tending to fall within that 2-meter survey stakeout buffer. Okay. This is a little different. Was an anomaly for us. When we opened up this unit here on this line, we came down on what appeared to be an alignment of stones that ran perpendicular to the boundary, right? So we followed it a little further toward the island, and it trended toward the island. We stopped there because we determined that we need to find where it ends out into the pond. Yeah. And this particular trench extends for over 10 meters, so over 30 feet of hand digging. Jonas is awesome. So what we found was additional boulders out onto this mark right here, and this mark right here. Formal construction or formal stone stacked stone construction is limited to this area right here. This is a little bit more unconsolidated boulders that don't exhibit any formal stacking or formal structure or formal construction. And we're thinking that this may be boulder push off of the island and into the pond. And then identification of the island boundary here, or potential island boundary here. Again, that nice, even stratigraphy when you're in the pond and starting to trend upward as you move toward the island here. So this point right here, these are really little tiny stones right here. That's also an idea of magnitude of how big this project is these tiny stones right in here, we're estimating the bottom of the bank of the island here. So again, photographs to illustrate what we saw in the soil stratigraphy profiles. East perimeter findings, the water levels are pretty high at this location. Base of excavation. So these stones right in this area here are these stones right in this area here. Okay. And these are what we believe to be associated with either remnant or potentially the beginning of the footing for the perimeter wall of Moku'ula Island. It's the same profile. The stones are in this section here. See that nice, even stratigraphy when you're in the pond and the beginning of the slope going toward the island. Yeah. And again here. This layer right here we believe to be the foot of the Moku'ula banks. These stones potentially associated with the footing for the perimeter wall and push from the island that may have occurred during the fill event flowing into the pond toward Waine'e. And this is that in profile. Okay. The foot of the Moku'ula bank going into the pond, this push sediment following that slope that we think may be a result of push during the fill event, and then the nice even stratigraphy on top of that. This is that really, really long trench. This is the intact segment, or what appears to be an intact construction or formalized construction of stone alignment in the wall of this trench, and then the more unconsolidated boulders toward the end that we believe maybe push into the pond. Okay. Possible boulder push. That's looking at that toward Front Street. Okay. One of the things that we did not accomplish with this, because we were more focused on trying to find the end of this boulder push, is we did not identify the island perimeter at this location. The reason why we're fairly certain that we're still in the pond here is, of course, as you've seen, the even stratigraphy of the upper layers. Yeah, there's no sloping or no differentiation in the sediment. That's the central section. It's still pretty straight. Well, that's the central section. So just to illustrate, just when you're in the pond sediment, how even the stratigraphy is across the length of the trenches. Okay. The other key thing here too is this is the island boundary here as depicted in 1916. This right here, this light line here is the 1884 boundary, right? So we have a discrepancy between the two boundaries with the finding that we're finding the banks or where it slopes into the pond closer to the 1916 boundary. And this is the photograph for this unit here. This cement railing we identified in this unit right here. We moved it this way and dropped it down and came across these stones in the water line, okay? Which, based on its position in the stratigraphy and where it's at in relation to the pond sediments, we're looking at that, or at these stones potentially being remnant or associated with the perimeter wall for Moku'ula Island. This up here, this is modern park fill and coral dredge. Originally, the coral dredge was thought to date to about 1918. Later investigation by UH Maui College actually came back with a date for this coral layer here, probably about 1954 or in the 1950s, associated with the development of the park that we know today or that we see today on the current landscape. The south perimeter. This is where we started in the parking lot. So we were a lot more cautious in the parking lot because we didn't know quite what we were gonna find. So in an attempt to find this area here, we started way back here to identify, and we see this nice even stratigraphy, no base stones near or below the water line until we hit here, just inside the 2-meter survey buffer, okay? And those are those base stones. Once we hit that, that was our first encounter with large or small basalt boulders, and we thought, oh, there, we think that's it, it's really close. In this section here, we followed the excavation as planned in the AISP, or the plan that, or our original research design. And you can see, similarly again, very little, all even stratigraphy, and right in this unit right here, we came right down on top of what appears to be constructed boulders. So for this, we did not follow it out because we know that we had negative findings in this unit right here. We're estimating the footing to be somewhere between the 1916 red boundary and the 2-meter survey buffer. These are photographs showing the results of excavation. Submerged stone right in here, possible foot of the stone wall in here, everything else, negative findings for basalt boulders or anything similar. And this is the plan view of that unit right here, showing the stack stone construction. The next, our next task was to identify whether or not this south holding pond was still present, or if the walls were still intact, and where the causeway coming off of Front Street, or the entry to Moku'ula, may be located. As you can see, the south holding pond wall on the Front Street side spans both parcel 2 and parcel 36. So let's take a look in parcel 2 to see if we identify the south holding pond walls. And we really think that we were able to find what we were looking for. This unit here was one of our first. We encountered very large basalt boulders intermixed with small basalt boulders that had some formal nature or formal stacking about them, characteristics about them. This is located about 1.5 meters from the red line, as illustrated in the 1916 map. And this is the plan view of that, showing in purple what we believe to be associated with the south wall, and out here, the gray, what we believe to be boulder push or fall. Our next area of excavation, we were looking at maybe, or trying to identify where this wall alignment meets the boundary of the island, where the intersection is at. What we found is in parcel 2, and we found this throughout, in parcel 2, there's been a lot of ground disturbing associated with early development of Malu'ulu'alele Park, modern development of Malu'ulu'alele Park. This includes utility lines, water lines, electrical jackets, and we encountered all of that in this excavation block right here, okay? So our first difficulty was getting around this early water line that appeared to be lying right on top of the Mokuhinia fill. This concrete curbing that we saw also on the east perimeter. And then in an attempt to get out of that heavily disturbed area, we moved north and we encountered a concrete jacket. And we're like, oh my goodness. So we stopped at that location and we moved south in hopes of finding an area that was not as disturbed. And with that, we identified what we believe to be the north wall of the holding pond, the north-facing wall of the holding pond, when we came down on this very formalized construction here, construction face. So photographs of the excavations showing the extent of what we believe to be either remnant or base of the holding pond wall on the Front Street side. That cement railing and water line and concrete jacket of the excavation block to the east. And then finally, finding the more formalized construction of this upper holding pond wall in this unit right here. So these really tiny boulders in there, that purple part, that's this really nice formal face. If we look toward the north or toward Ka'anapali, this is the intact wall section, and this is what we believe to be part of the wall collapse, part of wall collapse. Okay. Another interesting thing that we're finding in this unit is the integration of coral boulders, which we also saw on the north perimeter as well. Finding the south holding pond wall in the parking lot, we identified what we believe at depths consistent with what we found in parcel 2. We found what we believe to be remnant base stones of the south holding pond wall within a meter and a half of this red line. Because initially we were looking for the edge of this causeway, and because we identified that, we followed this alignment and it looked like it was more associated with the south holding pond wall, we decided to proceed toward the south to see if we could intersect this line or find something that might intersect this line. And we believe that we found that. You can kind of see it in plan view, this alignment here and this line perpendicular here. To kind of gut check or cross check, we dropped an auger, a bucket auger, so something to kind of drill at the base of excavation to see if we would encounter any boulders deeper and on this side, and that came up negative for that. So this unit in the parking lot, the initial remnant wall footing that we encountered, we were lucky. Somebody donated a sump pump to get the water out. It's something that we had been battling with. And when we took the water out, the rock alignment became a little bit more apparent. Yeah. The sump pump was definitely an eye-opener to be able to see below the water, or below the water line. So continuing south, excavation encounters this rock alignment here. We follow it toward Front Street and come up with these top stones here that may either be associated with intact construction, or it may be a little bit of push off into the pond. Because we were so close to this boundary, and because we were being really sensitive about minimizing our impact on the sediments of Moku'ula Island, we ended excavation here with the interpretation that this likely represents the causeway. And that's another view toward Front Street of that perpendicular alignment. Okay. Results of mechanical testing. So mechanical testing, we did that with a backhoe toward the back of the eastern portion of the park to investigate, is there anything kind of in the deeper portions of the pond? For backhoe trenches 2 through 6, generally followed the stratigraphy of backhoe trench 5. And this is considered representative of this area right in here. And again, as we've seen before, as we get into the pond, the stratigraphy becomes more even, yeah? Less disturbed, one layer on top of the other. Pretty straightforward. The exception is backhoe trench 1. Again, now we're encountering that concrete curbing now toward the back of the park. Cinder, heavy cinder on this side, no cinder on this side. To kind of examine what it was, we followed it for a little bit. And as it turned, considering the nature of this curb and the fact there's cinder on one side and no cinder on the other, we started to think about the possibility that it may be sort of like an old-timey track, like a track and field track. In backhoe trench 7, this is that back tennis court here. We pulled back our backhoe trenches toward Waine'e to see if we could find the embankment, that area. What we did find was more pond layers, more pond fill layers, as well as what appears to be sort of historic trash feature. And if you remember, part of this parcel was previously used as a dump, and we are unsure if this is representative of that or representative of remains of the fill event. One of the things that came out of this backhoe trench was what appeared to be a rail cart axle. So that, we take a closer look at that. And then,
Ms. Great. I'm running out of time on the presentation. I realize it's all of the details are very, very important, and obviously the $250,000 that we've appropriated for the survey is well spent. I just wanted to be able to get to the findings, as well as the interpretation and your recommendations moving forward. I apologize for the time constraints, but if we could just try to get to that portion of it, I think moving forward, I know one of the questions I have is the archaeological inventory survey is complete. When will it be submitted to SHPTA, which is the State Historic Preservation Division? And then at that point, we have to move on and decide on the restoration itself, restoration planning and community planning. So I guess the heavy lifting is, or the heavy digging or inventory is complete. And so I'm so happy about that, because we've been waiting for quite some time, and you've done a tremendous job. I just wanted to make sure that we have enough time to get to the findings and the interpretation and most important, your recommendations.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
So sorry about that.
Really interesting, but because of time constraints, we need to push it along a little faster.
See if we can get. So, the goal of the AIS: can you find the perimeter of the island? The findings that the results of the inventory survey, it looks like the perimeter of the island is more consistent with the 1916 survey map than the 1884 historic depiction of the island boundary. Okay. This is just an overview. And the termination points for the blue excavation units, for the most part, part fall within the 2-meter survey buffer. Okay. Between the 2-meter survey buffer and the red line. This is important. Another form of verification is when the park stopped being watered, everything dried out. The salt-tolerant plants of the pond came back, and the park grasses, or the ballpark grasses, were maintained over stable soils of Moku'ula Island. If we take a look at the difference in vegetation, we see that this 1916 survey outline also encloses the differences between the salt-tolerant plants and the ballpark plants, or the ballpark grasses, yeah, that require a whole lot more maintenance. So that's one clue. The land begins to tell you what you need to see. This is an image, 1940, of the area prior to asphalt installation, okay? This area in here are maintained park grasses. I want to call your attention, I don't know if you can quite make it out, there is a difference between these dried or more cleared areas and this vegetation down here, or what looks like to be consistent. This area looks like it may have this similar type of grass on it. Right? So you can kind of see the boundary. This red line and the 2-meter survey buffer generally follows that difference in vegetation from 1940 prior to the asphalt being installed. Right? So again, the land begins to tell us what we want to see. And further increasing our confidence in this map being a good source for the perimeter of the island. Okay. So what does that mean? So what did we find? We believe we found the base of the island perimeter. We confirmed the presence of that northern feature, that northern causeway, that was unknown until that 1916 map came to fruition. We refined the local Mokuhinia fill event to identify when it was accomplished and potentially how it was accomplished. The inventory survey results point to a possible controlled burn prior to the fill to remove all of the vegetation. And this is evidenced by, in the pond, we're finding burnt tree stubs. We're finding cut branches that look like it's machete cut. And we have a thin burn layer on the part of the surface that we did encounter during the inventory survey that follows the slope of the island. Just more of that illustrated. Cultural materials definitely point toward pre-contact, significant pre-contact cultural materials in the pond sediments, as well as in the island push, or the areas that have been pushed off the island during grubbing and grading for the fill event, as well as the historic nature of the fill. Okay. And this illustrates that. The other thing that we found during the course of our inventory survey is that we found highly fragmented, culturally sensitive remains, or fragmented human remains. These remains came up within the natural pond sediments or within the lower portions of the Mokuhinia fill. As we got further into the pond, it was a little bit more difficult to discern in the field where the boundary was because it was so wet. So these remains are, we believe, a part of the natural pond sediments, or were found in the pond sediments, and maybe at the upper boundary of the pond sediments. They were also intermixed with historic remains, dietary remains, which point toward the possibility that the origin of these remains may have been on the island and then pushed off historically. The fracture margins on the on the remains were such that it looked like it had been in the soil for quite a long time. Okay. 1916, Lahaina Park. New park for Malu'uluolele. We're looking at 2 different park episodes. This is important for the significance. Park episode, this is an early park episode, this early Malu'uluolele Park episode. 1950, instead of removing it or deconstructing the early park, they just filled over the top and presented a new surface. Okay. 1930, announcement in the Maui News of a brand new cinder track. So now we have a date for the cinder track. And that's the map for the cinder track from 1930, which corresponds to where we were finding portions of this curbing here, here, and here. This is a 1940 aerial showing the curbing. This is the track, and where we're finding the curbing along the outskirts of that track. So we have this early park feature that dates to about between 1920 and 1950. It's just further confirmation of this finding of the track. UH Maui College, when they completed their inventory survey, identified this curbing in their test units. When we overlaid their findings on our findings, we have the track, one side of the track and the other side of the track. And in between is about 10 meters, 8 meters or so, which is consistent with the size of the lanes. Oh, right. So 3.5 feet, about a meter, 5 to 6 lanes. Generally consistent with the width here. So we have this early track. What's interesting is that this former pier is located between the 2 track rails. With that being said, one of the early interpretations that I had for those wood planks that we found in the backhoe trench on the Waianae side, that maybe it's a companion pier to this. When we look at the pier, when we look at this finding closer, the placement of the wood planks in between the 2 rails, or the track curbing, is a bit curious, considering that you're running across this, right? So the stability of that brings that into question. If we look here, this is that coral fill for the modern park, and these wood planks directly below it. So stratigraphically, it appears to be associated more with this early park layer than directly associated with Moku'ula. But that needs to be a little bit more investigation. Maui College also points this out when they identified their curbing. They noted that the wood planks here ran directly underneath that concrete curbing. So extended for 2 meters toward here and through the concrete curbing. So the purpose and function of these wood planks, maybe we need a little bit more identification for restoration process purposes. This brings us back to this, where I was like, oh, cool, the companion pier. Now we're not so sure what this may or may not represent. Maybe further investigation here to determine the function and nature of these planks in relationship to the fill event. So re-examination of what was thought to be the wooden pier. analysis of project effect and draft recommendations. Again, this is the current conceptual restoration site plan. Our findings show, or the findings of the inventory survey shows, that the edges of the island are more consistent with this 1916 rendering. So when we place the 1916 survey map over the current conceptual plan, we see that there's a fairly significant difference in the depiction of the boundaries. You can see. Okay. It'll come up. This is the North Causeway here. The current conceptual plan does not account for the North Causeway. Okay. So if this were to be built as conceptualized here, it would eliminate this North Causeway, and we need a lot more information about what is the purpose of this causeway, when was it built, why was it built, and its association with Moku'ula Island. Okay. For the wood planks, however, those are located in this area reserved for future cultural practices and cultural interpretation with Friends of Moku'ula. So this falls outside of our current APE and can be considered as passively preserved. Yeah. Okay. So horizontally, we would look at elimination of the northern causeway if it's built as an effect, if it's built according to the current conceptual plan. Okay. Vertically, so now we have to look vertically, yeah? Vertically, the 35% design indicates that the maximum water depth of 2 feet is necessary to establish coot foraging habitat for the wetland restoration project, okay? In order to accomplish this desired depth, or this desired depth for habitat, it would require excavation or construction excavation to depths ranging from 3.5 to 4.5 feet below the current surface. Okay? What this would do vertically is removal of the early Malu Ulu Olele Park layers, removal of the historic fill associated with the reclamation of local Mokuhinia. In that respect, we believe that we have enough information gathered that we're likely not going to recommend any further work for those layers and those sites. Of particular concern, however, is the interaction of construction with the highly significant natural pond sediments. Yeah. When Oceanit did soil borings for their remediation assessment, they documented pond sediments at 3.1 to 5.2 feet below the current ground surface. So don't forget, so we're looking at construction excavation between 3 and 4 feet, right? Closer to the island, we see a depth range of the contact between the Mokuhinia fill, or the land reclamation fill, and the natural pond sediment. We see a varying depth between 3 and 5 feet on the eastern side, 2.6 and 3 feet on the northern side, 3.5 to 4 feet. Sorry, that's the western side. On the southern side, 2.6 to 3.9, so 4 feet. So we have this sort of undulating pond topography, right, that ranges, that indicates that potentially construction excavation, as currently planned in the conceptual design, would present a potential adverse effect for these sediments. The other information that we have is the 1916 original pond profiles, where even in the early pond profiles, we see this sort of undulating topography or contour of the pond bottom. Yeah, this rendering was developed out of the 1916 pond profiles. So the undulating contours of the pond mud and peat layers indicates the potential for excavation interception with significant natural pond sediments. Okay. So the draft recommendations. So we can look at the recommendations in two ways. One, if the restoration of Mokuhinia wetland goes before the restoration of the wall, Moku'ula perimeter wall, right? So we're gonna look at pre-Moku'ula restoration. And for this, we're recommending, similar to what they recommended in the original conceptual design, preservation through avoidance and protection, and development of a 10-meter buffer, beginning from the 2-meter survey stakeout buffer of the 1916 plan map outward. Okay. This is what that looks like, and you can see that it's significantly different from what is depicted in the original conceptual plan. This thick red line here is the 2-meter width of the 2-meter stakeout buffer. This is a little difficult to see, but this crosshatch extending out from here is the 10-meter line. We've extended our finding for the south holding pond wall toward the north to account for the potential additional holding pond here that we did not identify, was not a part of this inventory survey fieldwork. And then that 10-meter buffer coming around this way. So the overall layout is significantly different than the original. Post Moku'ula restoration, potentially that 10-meter buffer, if the restoration of the island precedes the Mokuhinia wetland restoration, potentially that 10-meter buffer can go away, right? Because we'll have the restored walls, we'll know where the island is located, we'll have to, the wetland restoration would have to work carefully around the edges of the island, but potentially that could go away, yeah. Throughout it all, however, we are recommending for pre and post, we are recommending monitoring during all ground disturbing activities. And with regard to the sensitive fines, we are recommending that prior to initiation of either or, restoration of Moku'ula boundary or Moku'ula Island, or restoration of local Mokuhinia wetland, that the burial treatment and preservation plan be put into place. Okay. And to be able to accomplish this with heavy input, considering the high sensitivity and the importance of this area, heavy input from the community with the development of this plan. Okay. Again, for the Mokuhinia pond fill, we're recommending no further work, and for early Malu'ulu'olele Park, we're recommending no further work. Okay. So the buffer, so I just kind of want to show this. So at the end of the day, or at the end of the project, hopefully we can bring back the waters of Mokuhinia and the island perimeter wall for Moku'ula and go from this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee Gregg. I know that I believe the actual archaeological inventory survey is over 500 pages. So, members, I think you got the basic skinny as much as she could streamline it. Moving forward, it hasn't been filed yet with the State Historic Preservation Division. When do you anticipate submitting?
So I'm hoping that we can get everything cleaned and as thoroughly cleaned up as possible to submit by the end of this month.
The end of this month?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to be able to submit it by the end of this month, at some point, I know that the Department of Management is going to have to go out to the community and start vetting out a restoration plan or the conceptual restoration plan that's quite different from the original, and also incorporate some of the recommendations and the other options and place it forward into a presentation to the community. Is that correct? Is that my understanding is the next step? And then we would also at that point need to figure out which entity is going to execute the restoration plan. Therefore, the RFP needs to be drafted, and the $400,000 that is pending for that grantee, as well as the utilization of the historic preservation fund that has been currently collecting monies from the parking lot. So these are phases that we need to at least anticipate and allow our committee members to know what is the next step moving forward so that we have a roadmap.
So to make sure we're clear, this is archaeological inventory survey is not complete just by the submittal to SHPD. There's a SHPD review period, and during that review period, we will take the presentation to the community, hopefully in the mid-November. We have to check on scheduling and getting a room. And any comments, significant comments, will be, Tanya will be present and will be discussed with SHPD. And then once SHPD completes their review, then she submits the final report. Following that, acceptance of the final report by SHPD, at that time, the data recovery plan could potentially be submitted for SHPD review. My understanding is that the community is waiting for this AIS report and recommendations to give the county feedback as to what they would like to see as the first phase, or how the work should progress from the data recovery standpoint. So no one has seen it yet, including me. So once we get it to SHPD, we'll get to the community, get feedback, and hopefully they can voice their comments, the community can, back to the county and the council. The data recovery plan is not drafted, but it's being worked on by the Friends of Moku'ula's archaeologist, Teresa Donham, who was present at a former meeting. That, I believe, is all contracted. We're just waiting for this archaeological inventory survey, the community's input, and the county's blessing on that, and then it will be submitted to address the first phase of work only. Yeah. Another point to be made is that the Army Corps of Engineers, once this report is obviously submitted, we'll provide a copy to the Army Corps and also get their comments. But this Mokuhinia project, being a co-sponsor project with the Army Corps, communication needs to be made between the county and the Army Corps as to the significance or the impact of her recommendations on the 35% design. As you can see, it's fairly different from what they conceptualized, and we're not sure until we submit this to the Army Corps what the response is as to their ability to maintain their involvement with the project.
Yeah, I can see that, and also that since the original conceptual design is substantially different than the actual findings, the community's got to decide what exactly do they want restored. I guess there are some areas that are really sensitive and may need more investigation, and there are other areas that are solid in the findings that could be restored. But does the community want that area? And which area, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, along that should be designated as phase 1, 2, and 3? Starting at the parking lot, starting at the corner there. There are different areas that can be started first. So, and there are sensitive areas as well. all within the recommendations. So I think it's up to the community to, or at least more professional input as to where we begin after the review process of this archaeological inventory study. So members, do you have any questions at this stage? This is an update. It's been a long time coming. We were expecting this last December, and then February came, and then finally we're almost there. So, but the other, I guess, policies or vehicles that I've was able to pass to supplement this is already in place. Like I said, there's pending in the budget 400,000 for an RFP, and also a Hawaiian restoration revolving fund collecting monies. So is there any questions on the update? Mr. White, followed by Ms. Cochran, and then Ms. Sugimura.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate your work on this, because this has been a project that seems like it's taken longer than the bypass. Just a couple of questions. On, I don't know what page it is, but it's one of those maps near the end. It again refers to the perimeter fence for predator control. And that, I know that was a requirement of the Army Corps because this is considered a wetlands project. Is that still a requirement of the Army Corps? Because I think we made it pretty clear in this committee over a year ago that this is a historic preservation, not a reclamation of water habitat. So is that still going to be a requirement, and if so, why?
I remember some discussion about, that perimeter fence and what it would look like. I thought, and I'm gonna confirm with the Army Corps, amongst other things, but I thought that it was a request by the community. So I can confirm that if that's a project requirement or that came through community consultation.
Well,
so I'll confirm that.
Yeah, my recollection was that this was an Army Corps requirement, and when it was brought to the community, there were a lot of recommendations from the community that were simply ignored. And I think that was one of the reasons we stated over a year ago that if necessary, we felt comfortable moving ahead without the Army Corps. Because if the other question I have is with respect to the, and this is probably for Mrs. Gregg, the 10-foot buffer that you're referring to. I understand that that was a buffer that was established again by the Army Corps. But I think the sense of this committee last time we met was that we would prefer that you move ahead with your work to identify the perimeter of the island so that the excavation of the perimeter might take place before the excavation of the pond, so that rather than ending up with a 10-foot buffer, we actually have the waters come right up to the original rock work. So what is the current? I couldn't quite catch whether you were saying we need the buffer or we want to do work on the island prior to major excavation so we can eliminate the buffer. Which is it?
So, I just kind of want to revisit why we did the inventory survey was to determine the boundary for the wetland restoration. So when we look at the project recommendations, I'm looking at it from 2 points of view. The wetland, which comes first, right? The wetland restoration or the island perimeter wall restoration. It would, in my own opinion, it would be beneficial to restore the perimeter wall first. And a couple of reasons for that. One, it eliminates the 10-meter, it would potentially probably eliminate the 10-meter construction buffer for the wetland restoration. And bring the waters directly up. if the wetland restoration, if there's a decision to be made and the wetland restoration comes first, to shrink that buffer to closer to the perimeter of the island would be difficult then for the restoration of the wall, because now we have this water of the wetland to a restored pond or local Mokuhinia to contend with, while trying to dig through the fill to find the base stones for the island perimeter wall. So not only would the 10-meter buffer protect the perimeter of the island from construction, it would also assist with restoration of the perimeter wall if the pond comes first, right? Ultimately, though, it would be, for lack of a more professional term, awesome if the perimeter wall restoration came first. Yeah.
I think that was the agreement of the committee quite a while ago, and I agree totally.
Yeah.
Because I think this is just my own assumption, but it became a wetlands restoration because we got the Army Corps involved. For most of us, this has always been an archaeological restoration, not a wetlands restoration. So anyway, I love the work that you've done, and my other question is, I'm not going to ask how long it's going to take for SHPD to review and approve or get back to us, because I've gone through that process, and for something much, much simpler, it took us 2 years to get an approval. So my question is, what work can proceed if the direction is to move towards, if we were to say we want to use this $400,000 to further identify the and prepare for the restoration of the perimeter wall, is any of that work possible prior to the approval of the SHPD plan that you're submitting, or not the plan, the assessment?
I would hesitate to make that call without SHPD present, just because it's a great question. But I don't want to say, oh yeah, we can maybe look at more.
Can we call it a further survey, or an addended survey, or a supplemental survey, or something that would allow us to add to the plan add to the survey that you're presenting?
I think that conversation with SHPD would be a great one, and I think that if framed like that this is additional to, we're not making any construction construction types of assertions here. We just want to do additional archaeological investigation. My sense is they may be open to that, but again, I would go back to SHPD
I
and
understand your
confirm.
hesitancy, but I think this process has taken so long already that we need to look for ways to gently keep it moving.
Right.
And so I appreciate your comments. Thank you, Chair.
That's a good question. And in fact, I'll try to work with staff to frame it in a way that we can present, maybe via letter, or Ms. Tawamoto can assist us in conveying that.
And one last item. It says here, it identifies the location, which we're all aware of, the county pumping station, currently not part of the project. I don't think any of us want to proceed with the project with the pumping station in the middle of it. And that to me is an affront to any kind of archaeological or historical restoration. So on future maps, just exit out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. White. Ms. Cochran.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to have you here, and thank you for always being open and willing to share the works. And seeing Jonas out there literally with a spoon, a little trowel. I mean, those holes are not done by machine, and I mean, there's a few, but a lot of those trenches, and Mr. White knows he was there too. I mean, literally by hand. Wow, awesome work. So thank you so much. First question is, so what you've presented here today, I heard Chair Guzman say it's part of a 50-page thing. Is that available?
500.
Oh, 500, sorry. Yeah, add another zero. We got 80 today, so yes, of course, more than the 80. So the 500-page report of some kind, is that available to the public or to this body, or?
That'll be available as soon as I get it to SHPD. I can make that available. I just want to be sure that the same thing that the community is looking at is what SHPD is looking at.
Okay, and then you said potentially the end of this month.
The end of this month. I had originally thought it was going to be a little quicker, and then we took a look at the data, and it turned into like 5 dissertations. So I really apologize for the delay. I'm sorry.
And at that time, Chair, at that time, will it be also posted online at all in some form via this county, or I don't know, your company, or?
Well, what we could do is when we receive it from Ms. Lee Gregg or the Cultural Surveys Hawaii Incorporated, which is the company, the firm that we hired. Once we receive it, we'll post it on our county council website as a PDF.
Okay, excellent. And I just had a question. Did you do any type of excavation on the area where the island sits itself, or just around it?
The goal was to go around it. There was one unit, or on the north side, where one of the units came down on top of the edge of the island. So kind of right here as it sloped down. So we do have one unit that came down on top of the island, and it's in that unit where we were able to identify sort of that burned surface as well. So,
okay. I guess I was curious, in the blue 1916 Public Works map, I think 18 squares that are in 2 separate rows on the island.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's what's always piqued my interest in wondering what are those squares that are depicted on all these old maps, and it's kind of curious. Anyways, I guess you did not have a chance though to delve into those.
I'm going to show you where that's at.
Okay.
Okay, so those 18 square maps are right in the middle here. And then there's a larger square right here, and the boundary. So we were focused on this perimeter with no excavation in the central area.
Okay, I guess one day. And then, Chair, I think some of my line of thought is, we created that fund, and we would like to go out with an RFP of sorts for someone to do a proposal in order to do the restoration, right, preservation, all the great things that the mission for this area is about. So where, I guess what part of what you've shown us and what are the next steps, so to speak? I know we're not going to put an RFP out and here's the picture and this is what someone has to step up and tell us you can do this. I mean, we need to take it in little chunks and baby steps, right? We have the parking lot, we have Salvation Army, we have things in the way. And so just trying to figure out from, once all this gets solidified and said, pass through the entities that be, such as SHPD, CRC, I mean, what needs to happen. I'm just trying to figure what our timeline is and this whole restoration thing in relation to the funding.
That's a good question. I had anticipated us moving a lot quicker since last term. It was told to this committee that at least the archaeological inventory survey would be completed last December. So I had anticipated all of that by creating these other monetary vehicles to supplement. Since that hasn't happened, all those are pending. And so I know that what we need to do is, since we have the archaeological inventory survey, which actually identifies the perimeters and where we can start, because that's the proof. And once it gets approved by the State Historic Preservation Division, we can then move forward with a restoration plan or whatever the community wants to start with as part of the recommendations from the archaeological inventory. So if the community decides they want to start near the parking lot or near Moku'ula instead of Mokuhinia, then I think that's where the RFP needs to go. You know, what entity is going to help create that culturally, and as well as restoration plans, things like that, as well as utilizing those funds that we have in abeyance under the parking lot. So in terms of your question, timing-wise, I get back to, it should have been, we're behind schedule, and hopefully SHPTA will approve and go through their process quickly. So then at that point, we will have an identifiable approved inventory that we can say, yeah, these are where the artifacts are, these are where the walls are, and we can start, instead of something that hasn't been approved yet, and we start digging and then we get into trouble. You know, we start without the approval of SHPTA. That's right. We might get into trouble. So right. I'd rather wait till we get the approvals and all the other review processes that go through before we start the process. But I think there could be a way, and maybe we can start with an RFP. I haven't thought of that yet, that maybe we could start maybe that conceptual part of it, where we do an RFP and try to get some people bidding on it. But I'd probably have to think on that a little more, whether that can be possible without having the inventory approved yet. I mean, the archaeological inventory survey approved.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I think the other thing, Mr. White brought it up from the early beginnings of this, and I attended all those U.S. Army Corps engineering meetings, and it was, you know, is it a wetland? Is it for the birds? Is it for the, what is this? And the, right, the buffer and the type of fencing around it. So the money, there's a lot of funding, and it was supposed to be matching county and then $4 million or so from U.S. Army Corps. So where is that right now? Are we still, that's where I think the question becomes pertinent to know where we're headed, because this is going to tell us, are we on track with U.S. Army Corps and that whole concept and their timeline, or are we now going off and doing this other county type of procedure, you know? So or can we, are we commingling, are we mixing and matching our thoughts and, you know, mission here?
Ms. Tawamoto?
So the current status with the Army Corps is we have no more obligations to provide funding. This AIS is going to be like a in kind when we go to the next step, okay? So that's 200 plus some other thing, I can't remember. But we have, this is going to be taken as an in-kind match because we put up the 200 to get this data to provide for the final EA. At some point, and we probably need another meeting just to go through what the next steps is with the Army Corps. At some point, we're going to have to obligate more funds in order to engage the Army Corps. And that, I will, after this meeting, I'll go back and send emails to the Army Corps to confirm the process, because over a year has lapsed since my last conversation with them. But I believe that in order for us to get them to complete the final EA, we're going to have to give some amount, and it's not like in the $500,000 range, it's less than that because they're taking this as an in-kind, but it is some monetary amount that we need to provide to complete the final EA, because there is no money to complete the final EA at this point. Okay, so I'll get that information, and then I'll make sure that I have all the information, contact Chair Guzman, and we can work from there. Hopefully by then we have the community meeting on the roll and some other information enough to justify a meeting, another committee meeting. But I'll definitely get your next steps with the Army Corps. In the meantime, once we submit to SHPD, like I said, we're going to submit the draft AIS report to the Army Corps. I'm not sure what how they're going to receive this information, and they may say because of the findings, the area of wetland restoration is reduced, and it doesn't meet the minimum levels of project whatever for the Army Corps funding side. So I'll make sure I ask those questions also, and I'll get back to Chair Guzman. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Sugimura.
So a lot of my questions have been answered about funding. I was just wondering, kind of history of how long did this archaeological inventory survey take? It's very well done. I love your passion for what you're doing. It felt like National Geographic presentation right before my eyes, so thank you very much for that. But I wonder, how long did it take, and what did it cost, and like future funding, if you could, Mr.
I believe we appropriated 200,000 plus an additional 50,000 for fencing, but the 200,000 was for the archaeological survey itself. That was 2015, I believe we started it.
Thank you. And one last question, because over the years, just by reading the paper and being interested in this project, I remember, and I see Blossom in the audience for Tara, Friends of Moku'ula. So how does Friends of Moku'ula fit into this big picture?
Right now, as far as the survey is concerned, they really didn't. I mean, would you like to? Would one of you like to?
In terms of the item, the archaeological inventory survey, or the Mokuhinia ecosystem restoration project, which this is being done for, the Friends of Moku'ula is a stakeholder, a community organization, as well as a Waiola Church, neighboring properties, other groups that we know of that the Army Corps consulted with. That's their role in the Mokuhinia ecosystem restoration project. But in the land that the project sits on, you folks have or the county has granted them a lease. They have a lease. So they're not part of this specific Army Corps project, but they do have a lease for the lands affected by the Army Corps project.
I think so. What you're saying is they'll be involved. So
right.
Thank you.
Just because of the lease agreement that they are the lessees of the property.
Thank you.
We granted them $1 lease agreement for, I think, 30 years.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions that we have? Oh yeah, Mr. White.
Thank you, Chair. If we are able to proceed with further excavation, will you need a better security fence, or does the one that you have now suffice?
In conversations with folks from the community and communication with Friends of Moku'ula as well, it seems that some of the fencing, there may be some issues with break-ins for that. I don't know how to better secure that without building a wall, other than increased security presence at the area, and the main concern being that when we're in the park, we don't quite have the same protective cover that we had in the parking lot. Yeah, we were able to put steel plates over the trenches to protect the findings. The asphalt was prohibitive for any kind of looting in the park itself. However, it's an open field, yeah. And I believe that the area has experienced some looting in the past. So the security fence, I think, helped while we were out there to keep my survey controls in place and nobody's yanking them out of the ground and we're not spending 2 days trying to relocate those things. But the fencing is a great deterrent, and even better deterrent would be increased security presence or roaming, kind of, if the police can run by Front Street. I don't know if Councilmember Cochran has any additional.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Ms. Cochran?
Yeah, and thank you. That's always going to be an issue, you know, I mean, it's a chain link fence, and I don't know why people want to go in there, but they decide they want to. One question for you, Tanya, is the 56 traditional Hawaiian artifacts, is that meaning Eevee too? Is that?
No,
in
no,
that,
that is exclusive of EV. So EV is separate.
Okay.
That. So
Oh, I guess where's that? There's some wording about remains. So the remains, that's
Yeah.
meaning Eevee.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
what that's
The
meaning?
culturally sensitive remains is a reference.
Right, okay, I was trying to find that slide. Okay, and you were describing them within the pond sediment, or it was so?
Just like in the upper layers of the pond sediment and within the pond sediment. And we just wanted, for that, we wanted to make sure that we were interpreting kind of vertically where they came out, because if they came out of the Mokuhinia fill, that came from Mokuhinia. Yeah. The pond sediments themselves are different point of origin on island, right? So potentially we wanted to be sure in our interpretation of where it came out of, where the remains came out of. And it consistently has come up in the upper portions of the pond sediment, the natural pond sediment.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Chair, if you don't mind, on one of the maps, you showing kind of the color. Oh, it's this one here up on the slide. Sorry. And on the top corner, it says like preserving the traditional waterway or whatever from with canoe to Waiola, and you want to preserve that. What are you meaning by that?
That came out of community consultation with the Army Corps. So Mana'o from the community came back that historically there is mo'olelo about the ali'i traveling from the island to church through the waters of local Mokuhinia. And so that waterway was intended as a preservation of that mo'olelo or story,
right?
Tradition.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I will defer this matter, members.
No
Without objections. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Lee Gray and Mr. Hammett for attending, and also Ms. Tamoto. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a brief 5-minute recess to set up for Corporation Council deputies to come down to the floor for the next couple items. So we're in a brief recess. Call the chair, 5 minutes. Parks and Recreation, Energy, and Legal Affairs Committee shall now come to order. Members, moving on to the next agenda item, we have the PRL 1-25. This is the settlement authorization authorizing the mayor of the County of Maui to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the State of Hawaii Department of Defense, the National Cemetery Administration of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the State Historic Preservation Division of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Civil number 15-1-0209(2). Members, previously this item was in this committee on October 3rd. The committee then requested that the proposed memorandum of agreement be revised to allow 6 months rather than 3 months on page 5, section 7E of the plan to be presented for acceptance to both the Office of Veterans Services and the county from the date of execution of the MOA. The committee also requested that the references to the attachments be deleted because no attachments were being offered in the connection with the committee's review. We have here our Deputy Corporation Counsel, Ms. Tarnstrom, and she presented this case previously in this committee. And we also have here David Good for a resource. Ms. Tarnstrom, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, council members. Just as a reminder, this is, as the chair indicated, this is related to the litigation between the Maui Veterans Cemetery and the Mokuhinia Cemetery Association. At our last presentation on this agreement, the council requested two different changes. The first, as the chair said, related to the attachments. Both of those have been addressed, hopefully in a manner that is acceptable to the committee. Attachment A has been provided. That was the result of lengthy discussions between the two main parties in this action, the Maui Veterans Cemetery, or the State Office of Veterans Services, and the the Mokuhinia Cemetery Association. So that's the result of a compromise between them, and that has been provided. Attachment B has been reworded to indicate that it previously was going to attach a draft plan to this attachment, and we've just confirmed that once that maintenance and operation plan is finalized and accepted by this council, this committee and council, that it will just be attached to this document as well, so they can live together for once it's completed. And then, as noted, also the timeline to present the state and county agreements and plan has been extended to 6 months from 3 months. And those are the only changes to this document. And I can take any questions that the committee has, but it appears that they've all been addressed.
Okay. Mr. Good, do you have any statements? Are you okay with the 6 months to allow you to draft the maintenance plan? Is that sufficient enough time for your department to submit a maintenance plan?
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. David Good, Director, Department of Public Works. 6 months is fine. Yeah, okay. We appreciate the extra time.
Okay. Very good. Any members, do you have any questions at this time? That was the only two items, was the attachments, because there were no attachments to the document that was presented on the floor, as well as the 3 months versus requesting a 6 months time period to draft the maintenance plan on our part. So that being said, no further questions. The chair would entertain a motion to recommend the passage on first reading of the revised proposed bill entitled Bill for an Ordinance Authorizing the Mayor of the County of Maui to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the State of Hawaii Department of Defense, the National Cemetery Administration of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the State Historic Preservation Division of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation to set forth guidelines to maintain the Maui Veterans Cemetery at shrine status.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Ms. Crivello. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. We have 5 ayes, no noes, 4 excused. Motion carries. Thank you, members. Moving on to the next item. I'm going to switch the Deputy Corporation Counsel. Members, this is the Harry Donenfeld versus County of Maui et al. Civil number 16-00381, DKW-KJM, PRL-1-24. This is in regards to the correspondence dated September 12, 2017 by the Department of Corporation Counsel regarding the consideration of the resolution entitled Authorizing an Increase in the Compensation Related to the Employment of Special Counsel Kobayashi, Sugita, and Goda, LLP, in Harry Donenfeld versus County of Maui. Also, in regards to the correspondence dated October 11, 2017 from the Department of Corporation Counsel requesting an opportunity to discuss the status of the settlement negotiations in this case. Mr. Bilberry, this is your case. Go ahead and present in open session whatever openings that you would like to present.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As some of you may know, we had a settlement conference in this case with the magistrate judge handling it in Honolulu in Federal District Court. The case is a retaliation claim brought by Harry Donenfeld, who's a former Maui County Film Commissioner. Mr. Donenfeld claimed he was fired at the behest of a political ally of the mayor, and he alleged defamation, discrimination, and a number of other claims. Following the settlement conference on September 20th, we did have some further negotiations with Mr. Donenfeld, and we've received a settlement offer, which is within the settlement authority, which was granted by the council and the committee. And I'll be asking if we could go into executive session to discuss the terms of that proposed settlement in a little more detail.
Okay, thank you.
To make our office's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Bilberry. Members, do you have any questions in open sessions that you may have? Seeing none, there's been a request to enter into executive session. The chair will entertain a motion to convene executive meeting pursuant to Section 92-5A4 of the HRS to consult with legal counsel on questions and issues pertaining to powers, duties, and privileges, immunities, and liabilities of this county, this committee, and this council.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Carroll. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We have five ayes, no noes, and 4 excused. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, and I believe this is the last item on the agenda. This is the settlement authorization for Duki Ricadio versus County of Maui et al. Civil number 14-1-0451 paren 2 PRL 126. The committee is in receipt of the correspondence dated October 5th from the Department of Corporation requesting consideration of the proposed resolution authorizing settlement of the Duki Ricadio versus County of Maui case. I believe this is also Mr. Bilberry's case. You may present in open session.
Thank you again, Chair. As some of you may recall, this is a case brought by a former Maui police officer alleging disability discrimination based on a medical condition and epilepsy that the officer suffered while a Maui County police officer. The suit's been pending for some time. We are actually scheduled to go to trial on November 6th. The mediator in this case has presented us with a final settlement offer from Mr. Ricadio and his wife. And I have a copy of that with me, and I'd like to present that in executive session to the council to discuss the terms of the settlement and our office's recommendation. And also here today is McGonigal, who is the business administrator with MPD.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bilberry. Members, do you have any further questions in open session? Seeing none, there's been a request to enter into executive session. The chair will entertain a motion to convene executive session pursuant to Section 92.5A4 and 92.5A8 under the HRS to consult with legal counsel on questions and issues pertaining to powers, duties, privileges, immunities, and liabilities of the county, the council, and the committee. Also for privilege in regards to personnel matters as well as court orders.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. White. Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Carroll. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. We have 5 ayes, no noes, 4 excused. Motion carries. Thank you. Members, we'll take a brief recess to set up the chambers for executive session. PRL committee shall now reconvene in open session. Calling item PRL 124, Harry Donenfeld versus County of Maui et al., civil number 16-00381, DKW-KJM, pursuant to the executive session discussion with Corporation Counsel. The chair, without objection, will defer this matter.
No
objections.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, PRL 126, Dookie J. Ricardio versus County of Maui et al., civil number 15-1-0451, paren 2, pursuant to our executive session and discussion with Corporation Counsel. The chair will entertain a motion to adopt the resolution entitled Authorizing Settlement of Doogie Ricardio versus County of Maui et al., civil number 14-1-04512, and filing of any of the communications.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Ms. Crivello. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. 5 ayes, no noes, 4 excused. Motion carries. Thank you, members. This will conclude our agenda for today. Thank you all. Thank you.